I have watched your political career over the years. It's been a very brave journey. More dramatic than any film script, hasn't it?
It's been a tempestuous life and career.
You've been through trials, triumphs, crises. How is it that you've never shown fear or anger or any other emotion? And I know you must have them.
Yes, of course, I'm human like everyone else. I do experience emotions, and I wouldn't be normal if I didn't experience feelings of anger and other emotions. But when you are a leader, you learn to control your emotions. You learn not to show them openly. You have to.
So is it necessary to appear tougher than one actually is to be accepted as a leader in this patriarchal world of politics?
I've never consciously tried to appear tough. I suppose whatever I have done, my reactions or actions, have made me appear tough.
You always have this very serene, calm exterior. I want to know what lies behind it.
I keep my emotions to myself. They are not for public display. I've never lost my temper in public.
No.
I've never wept in public.
How do you manage to do that?
I have a lot of willpower, a lot of self-control.
But do you think politics has made you tougher?
Of course, yes. I wasn't like this at all.
We're not born tough.
I don't think anyone is born tough. I think experiences shape you and life molds you as you go along. When I started out, I was very shy, terrified of meeting strangers. I'm a person who hates the limelight.
Isn't that surprising?
It's very surprising. I have been propelled by fate into two high-profile careers, both not of my choosing. There's been so much mud slung at me. I've had to face so many brickbats. I've had to face so much vilification and slander. That hasn't been easy. If I had been an academician, if I had been a lawyer, no one would have said such nasty things about me. But when it comes to a politician or a political leader, the questions are so downright demeaning, insulting, humiliating. In the normal course, no one would put up with that kind of questioning. But as a politician, anyone can say anything about you, you have to take it. People who know nothing about you, who have never met you, say the most vile things about you, and you have to take it with a smile. That's very difficult, especially for a hypersensitive person, which is what I am.
I can imagine.
And it's not true that if you are in politics long enough, you grow a thick skin. It never happens. If you're sensitive, if you're born sensitive, you stay sensitive till the end of your life. And the kind of terrible, distorted image that has been built up of me in the media, that really hurts, because that's not me, that's not what I am.
Do you think that you intimidate men?
You must ask them. I think I do.
You do.
Nowadays, most men I meet are terrified of me.
Why do you think?
Probably it's this image I have, and I don't take any nonsense from anyone nowadays. That old Jayalalitha is gone. The Jayalalitha who used to be tongue-tied when someone insulted her or someone was rude to her, who didn't know how to answer back, who didn't know how to retort, who used to keep quiet, withdraw into herself, cringe inwardly, who used to wait to go home and then shut the door and cry in a dark room. That Jayalalitha is gone, dead forever. I don't think I've said this before, I'm saying this now. I am not one who goes looking for a fight. Generally, I'm very reserved. I speak only if I'm spoken to. But if a fight comes my way, I won't run away. And nowadays, if someone gives me one blow, I'll give back 10. I don't take any nonsense from anyone nowadays. Life has made me like that. I wasn't like this before.
Your critics, your male critics, have often implied that you're a man-hater. Are you?
No, not at all. I'm not a man-hater. And not just my male critics, some of my worst critics have been women.
But that often happens. Who is the worst enemy, man or woman?
I think both of them are equally lovable or equally. I can't say which one is worse.
Would you say there's more than an element of male chauvinism in politics?
There is. Our society itself is a male dominated society. There is a lot of male chauvinism in every sphere of life, especially in politics. I'm trying very hard to change that. I think I've succeeded to a great extent. I was the first to bring in reservation for women in the organizational posts.
Would you say there's more male chauvinism in politics or in films?
I think both are equally bad. But in films, a woman is an essential commodity. Whether you like it or not, you need the glamour that women can provide in films. You can't do without them. In politics, you can do without them. They try very hard to do without them. But where people like me are concerned, it's not so easy to just wish me away. Many people would love to.
So what does it need for a woman to survive in this world?
It needs a lot of self-confidence, courage, willpower, the capacity to take anything, no matter how unpleasant, how bitter, how painful, and not show that it hurts. It's very difficult. This is one of the most demanding fields in the world, politics. And for a woman to be a success in politics is still a rarity in the entire world. Even in an emancipated, so-called liberated country like the United States of America, can you envision any woman becoming the president in the near future? It's just not possible. At least England had Margaret Thatcher. But in the United States, no woman has even made it as vice president. So there's a lot of male chauvinism, even in American society. If that is the case there, then you can well imagine the extent of male chauvinism in India.
And in South India, which is particularly conservative, it's much harder for a woman to establish herself and her identity.
You're very right. You see, because I don't come from a political family. If you look at all the other women leaders who have made it to the top in Asia, they were all either daughters or wives or widows of former prime ministers or presidents. But you can't find another case like mine.
You have been attacked, humiliated, injured, jailed even. Don't you ever feel, this is not worth it? What the hell? I don't need this.
I have felt it, but then circumstances were such that I could not escape what was happening to me. Nothing really was worth the humiliation I suffered when I was attacked in the assembly, on the floor of the Legislative Assembly on March 25th, 1989, in the presence of the Chief Minister, Mr. Karunanidhi, with both his wives watching from the VIP boxes. All his MLAs and ministers physically assaulted me. They grabbed anything they could lay their hands upon. Chairs, mics, a heavy brass bell on the speaker's table. If they had succeeded in banging it on my head, I wouldn't be alive today. My MLAs saved me that day. And one of them even tried to pull at my sari. They pulled at my hair. In fact, they tore out some of my hair. They threw chappals at me. They threw big bundles of papers, heavy books at me. That day, I left the assembly in tears, but I was also angry. I made a vow that day. I said, I will never set foot in this assembly again as long as this man continues to be the Chief Minister. And when I do enter this assembly again, I will enter as Chief Minister. And I fulfilled my vow within 2 years. I did it. Among all the prisons in Tamil Nadu, the Madras Central Prison is the worst. It's the most unhygienic, dirtiest prison imaginable. And the place where I was kept, where I was confined, was a condemned building. It was used as a women's wing earlier for women prisoners. And then it was declared to be unsafe. So most of the prisoners were moved out to another prison. This was reopened in my honor. You must have seen some of these old English movies where they show medieval dungeons. It was exactly like that, a dark dungeon. It hadn't been swept or cleaned for years probably. There were cobwebs hanging everywhere, growth of fungus everywhere, and all kinds of vermin crawling all over the place. You could have conducted a zoology class there. Every conceivable type of insect and rodent was there. There were big rats, sewer rats, bandicoots. And there were swarms of mosquitoes all over the place. And there was nothing in the cell. No furniture. I had to sit and lie on the bare floor. And there was not even a square inch of even space on that floor. It was full of pits and holes, with vermin crawling out of each hole. It was the filthiest, most dismal place imaginable. And our Madras Central Prison is situated bang on the banks of the Coombe River, which is nothing but an open sewer. It was stinking to high hell. I stayed there for a month. That steeled me, and now I think I'm quite proud of that experience, because they had spies all around me. Every day the chief minister and his minister used to ring up to the jail superintendent and used to ask for reports about me. Is she crying? Is she upset?
Didn't cry?
I didn't cry, not even. I didn't shed a single tear. I steeled myself, and in the moment I was made to step inside the police van, I said, now I'm going to bear whatever comes with fortitude. I was absolutely calm, absolutely dignified. Normally I'm a very hot-tempered, short-tempered person. I didn't throw any tantrums. They were asking all these questions. Is she crying? Is she upset?
They wanted to break your spirit.
They wanted to break my spirit, but they didn't succeed. It was one of the worst times in my life. But then I thought, this must have happened to so many other women during the freedom struggle for independence. They must have faced similar conditions under British rule. I thought if those brave women could bear it, why can't I do the same? And at the time when I was jailed, thousands of my party workers, including women, were also jailed at the same time, because they demonstrated and conducted agitations protesting against my arrest. Thousands were arrested all over the state. So I thought they must be undergoing the same kind of suffering. If they can bear it,
so can I.
So can I.
Jaya, this has been a wonderful evening for me. I cherish this time spent together. And I want to thank you so much for being so honest and so gracious.
It's been a wonderful experience for me too. And I think it's a tribute to your charm and your charms of persuasion, your talent, that you've been able to elicit answers from me which no one ever could dream of doing until today.
Thank you so much. I'm honored. Thank you for this rendezvous.
Thank you too.
Next interview is the profile, the personality interview, which is focusing on the person himself or herself with a particular angle. So the questions are framed based on the purpose of the interview, of the nature of the topic. Along with these principles, having interpretative questions, having informative questions, having investigative questions, depending on the issue in focus, depending on the person in focus. When holding particularly an interview with a person for a profile, for a personality sketch, a journalist will always not only listen, but also watch very attentively, very closely. Listening and watching is a very important demand placed on a journalist. As Tim Sebastian would say, 80% of an interview is listening and watching. Only 20% is talking from the part of the interviewer, from the part of the journalist. Why should a journalist watch while interviewing? It is not enough to focus only on what is being said. Equal importance also has to be given to how it is being said. Focus on the body language of the person being interviewed. When the person is angry, there is a story behind that anger. When the person suddenly turns sad, there is a story behind that sadness. When the interviewee becomes very much upset, there is a story behind being upset. When the person becomes very joyful, there will always be an episode in his or in her life, and it is the responsibility of the interviewer, the journalist, to dig into that anger, to probe into that sadness, to go behind that embarrassment that the person had experienced. The episode in his or in her life that brings joy into his or her life. And it is during these observations, when the journalist is keenly observing both the verbal and non-verbal communications of the interviewee, that exclusive stories can be brought before the viewer, before the reader. When an interview is going on, one of the hazards a journalist faces is off the record segment. What is off the record segment? Every person will always have something to hide. There will always be something that the person does not want anyone to know. At the most unexpected moment, the interviewee may blurt out or may open up and may share with the journalist what she never had intended to share. At that particular moment, the person realizes that revelation of this information is going to be dangerous. It could tarnish the image, and therefore tells the journalist who is interviewing off the record, please don't publish it. Please don't include this as part of the interview when you air it on the channel. This is a big predicament. A journalist is supposed to become the eyes, the ears, the tongue, and the brain of the viewers, of the readers. Whom will you obey. How will you respond to the demand placed on you by the interviewee and also at the same time by the public? During this predicament, a journalist should be very strategic. When he is bound to abide by the off the record demand, he needs to also prove himself to be accountable to the public by taking that particular information as a tip and trying to get more information from other sources if what is revealed is of significance to the public. This is one predicament that journalists will have to strategically manage during an interview. Another problem a journalist faces during an interview could be for an opinion interview, could be for a panel interview. When a question is asked, the person, the spokesperson, who is bound to give an answer, evades the question, avoids the question, and gives irrelevant answer purposefully. How will you respond in such a situation? And a third predicament that a journalist faces while eliciting information from news sources is the refusal of a person who is bound to answer when an allegation is leveled against him or her. Silence. No comments. A journalist is bound to include that response also in the interview. Silence also, no comments response also will speak about what is inside. In all these moments of predicament, a journalist who is a master of information, a person who is fully equipped with the ground realities on the issue in focus, who is thorough with the person being interviewed, who is ultimately accountable to the readers, who is ultimately answerable to the viewers, to the general public, will keep always the public good as the ultimate yardstick for what to be included in newspaper, in television, in magazine, in a web portal. So interviewing is an art. The success of a journalist depends on his or her mastery over the art of interviewing.